At 7 months pregnant, Sarah Mitchell's arms shattered in front of 200 witnesses at JFK Airport. Her billionaire husband broke it. The cameras captured everything. And for one brief moment, she thought justice was finally within reach. She was wrong. What Sarah didn't know was that her nightmare was orchestrated by people she'd never suspect. A corporate conspiracy, a planted mistress, and someone she thought was saving her, who was actually using her as bait. This isn't just a story about domestic violence. It's about what happens when a brilliant woman, isolated and broken, remembers exactly how smart she really is. It's about a mother who transforms from victim to strategist, who takes on a billionaire, a corporation, and a broken legal system, all while 9 months pregnant. By the end, everyone who underestimated Sarah Mitchell learned the same lesson. Never corner a woman who used to optimize supply chains for Amazon. She'll optimize her revenge the same way. But before we begin, I need to tell you something important. This story gets dark before it gets light. There are 3 moments where Sarah almost breaks completely. 2 times when she thinks she's won, only to be crushed harder. And 1 twist so unexpected that when it comes, you'll understand why over 2 million people watch this story without looking away. So here's my promise to you. Stay until the end. Because what Sarah does in that final courtroom scene, it's the kind of justice that makes you believe truth can actually win, even when it seems impossible. If you're ready for a story about real survival, real strength, and real revenge, then settle in. Hit that like button if you appreciate stories about women who refuse to stay broken. Drop a comment telling me if you've ever had to fight a system that seemed designed to protect the powerful. And subscribe because we tell stories here that the world needs to hear. Stories about ordinary people doing extraordinary things when pushed to their absolute limit. Now let's go back to that December morning at JFK Airport, where Sarah's old life ended and her new one began in the worst way possible. At JFK Airport on a cold December morning, Sarah Mitchell pushed her son's stroller through Terminal 4 with trembling hands. She was 7 months pregnant, exhausted, and trying desperately to keep her 18-month-old son Liam calm in the crowded chaos. The early morning flight crowds pressed around them, business people rushing past with coffee cups and rolling luggage, oblivious to the storm gathering just a few feet behind her. Sarah had seen the look in Brandon's eyes before, that cold, dangerous glint that made her stomach drop. But never in public, never where escape was possible, never where witnesses could see the monster hiding behind the billionaire's polished smile. Brandon Mitchell's footsteps grew louder behind her, his expensive shoes clicking sharply against the polished floor. Next to him walked Tiffany Reed, his executive assistant, holding her iPhone like a weapon she was preparing to fire. Sarah felt the weight of their approach before she heard it, a shadow moving too quickly, breath rattling with barely contained rage. She turned just enough to see Brandon's face twisted with fury, and her heart began to pound against her ribs like a trapped bird. The terminal noise dimmed in her ears as Brandon stepped directly in front of the stroller, blocking her path completely. His 6'2" frame towered over her, and for a moment Sarah couldn't breathe. "So this is what you've been hiding?" Brandon hissed, thrusting his phone toward her face with such force that Sarah flinched backward. On the screen was a blurred video, grainy and obviously manipulated, but the kind of fabricated evidence meant to wound. Sarah's breath caught in her throat as she recognized herself in the footage, talking to a man she'd never met. The timestamp was from last week. The location showed Central Park. None of it was real. "Jonathan, that's not real," Sarah whispered, using his middle name the way she always did when trying to calm him. I've never—" "Liar," Brandon snapped, and the word echoed through the terminal like a gunshot. Tiffany placed a perfectly manicured hand on Brandon's arm, her voice dripping with poison sweetness as she whispered just loud enough for Sarah to hear. "She's been playing you, Brandon. I warned you she would do this. Women like her always do." Travelers around them began to slow, sensing the spark of danger in the air. A businessman paused mid-stride. A mother pulled her daughter closer. Phones began to lift, cameras focusing on the scene unfolding before them. Sarah reached for Liam, who had started to whimper in his stroller, kicking his small legs with growing distress. But Brandon grabbed her wrist before she could touch their son. His grip was iron, fingers digging into her skin with brutal force. Pain shot up Sarah's arm like lightning. She gasped, stumbling slightly from the pressure and the weight of the baby she carried. Please, she whispered, her voice breaking. Not here, our son is watching. But Brandon was past hearing, past reason, past anything resembling the man she had married 3 years ago. Tiffany's whisper curled into his ear feeding the fire that already burned behind his eyes. She found the accounts, Brandon. She's going to destroy everything you built. That was when it happened. Brandon yanked Sarah's arm upward with such violent force that the sound of bone breaking cut through the airport announcements and the hum of conversation. The crack echoed across the terminal, sharp and unmistakable. Sarah's legs buckled beneath her. The world tilted sideways as she collapsed to her knees on the cold floor, one hand instinctively protecting her pregnant belly, while the other hung useless at her side, radiating waves of agony that made her vision blur and darken at the edges. Liam's scream pierced the air, high and terrified. People around them froze, suspended in that terrible moment between witnessing violence and deciding whether to intervene. Brandon stood over her, chest heaving, still gripping her broken arm as if he didn't understand what he'd just done. Or perhaps he understood perfectly and simply didn't care. Dozens of phones were recording now, capturing every angle. The businessman who had paused was already dialing 911. A TSA officer spoke urgently into his radio. An elderly woman stepped protectively in front of Liam's stroller, shielding the crying child from the nightmare unfolding before him. Sarah felt the cold airport floor pressing against her knees. Each breath was a struggle, each heartbeat a drum of terror pounding in her ears. She could barely think through the pain, barely process what had just happened. But somewhere in the chaos, she heard a voice. A woman's voice, calm and commanding, cutting through everything else. "Step away from her, now!" Sarah lifted her eyes, trembling, as a figure stepped into view, heels clicking with purpose across the tile floor. The woman was in her late 50s, impeccably dressed in a tailored suit, with steel gray hair and eyes that held both fury and concern. Margaret Hayes. Brandon straightened, trying to mask his rage with confusion, attempting to regain control of the narrative, even as security officers began to converge on their location. "Margaret, this is a private family matter. You don't understand what—" "I understand perfectly," Margaret interrupted, her voice low and dangerous as she knelt beside Sarah. Her hand touched Sarah's shoulder with surprising gentleness. "Emily, can you hear me? It's all right. I'm here now. You're safe." Sarah blinked through tears of pain and confusion. How did this woman know her middle name? Why did her voice sound like a memory from years ago, gentle yet undeniably protective? Brandon took a step forward, and Margaret's head snapped up, her gaze stopping him mid-stride like he'd hit an invisible wall. "Touch her again," Margaret said quietly, "and I will make sure the board sees this footage before lunch. Every angle, every witness, every second of what you just did to your pregnant wife in front of your son." The blood drained from Brandon's face as he finally seemed to notice the phones, the cameras, the crowd that had gathered. Tiffany backed away slightly, her confident mask slipping for the first time. Sirens wailed in the distance, growing closer. Sarah felt herself beginning to fade, the pain and shock pulling her under. But before darkness claimed her completely, she heard Margaret's voice one more time, steady and sure. "You just made the biggest mistake of your life, Brandon, and I'm going to make certain you pay for every second of it." And then everything went black. 3 years earlier, Sarah Carter had stood in front of 200 people at a tech conference in Boston, presenting her thesis on optimizing global supply chain logistics. She was 26, brilliant, fresh out of MIT, with a mind that could see patterns where others saw only chaos. Her presentation had drawn applause, job offers, and the attention of a man who would change her life forever. Brandon Mitchell appeared at the reception afterward, champagne glass in hand, smile calibrated to perfection. He was 39 then, already a billionaire, already commanding rooms with nothing more than his presence. When he approached Sarah, she felt like the only person in the building. "You're too smart for this room," he'd said, and she had laughed, thinking it was a line. But Brandon had been serious. "I mean it. What you just presented, that's the future. And I want to invest in it, in you." 6 months later, they were engaged. A year after that, married in a ceremony that made the society pages. Brandon swept her into a world of penthouses and private jets, of galas where she wore gowns that cost more than her student loans, of a life that seemed impossibly perfect. The first crack appeared so subtly that Sarah almost missed it. She was working on a consulting contract, 8 months pregnant with Liam, when Brandon suggested she take a break. "Just until after the baby," he'd said. You need rest. I'll handle everything financially. You focus on being healthy. It seemed reasonable, loving even. So Sarah agreed. But after Liam was born, when Sarah mentioned returning to work, Brandon's response was different, colder. Why do you need to work? I provide everything. Are you saying I'm not enough? Sarah had backed down, telling herself it was just stress, just adjustment to new parenthood. She could return to her career later. There was time. Except there wasn't. Brandon changed the passwords on their joint bank accounts. For security, he explained, I'll give you a credit card for anything you need. He moved them to a penthouse on the 45th floor of a Manhattan high-rise, so far above the street that Sarah felt detached from the world itself. The elevator required a special key that only Brandon carried. Small freedoms disappeared one by one. Sarah's laptop mysteriously broke. Her phone began having issues. Old friends stopped calling after Brandon mentioned, casually, so casually that Sarah was overwhelmed with motherhood and needed space. The isolation happened so gradually that Sarah didn't realize she was trapped until the cage was already locked. Then came the night that changed everything. Sarah had been looking for tax documents on Brandon's laptop. He told her to find them herself, when she stumbled across a folder labeled Offshore Holdings. Inside were spreadsheets showing transfers to accounts in the Cayman Islands. Millions of dollars, vendor names she didn't recognize, missing signatures on authorization forms. She didn't understand all of it, but she understood enough. The pattern she'd been trained to see at MIT leaped out at her. This wasn't legal corporate structuring, this was fraud. When Brandon came home that night, Sarah asked about it carefully, gently, thinking there must be an explanation. I saw some files on your computer, the offshore accounts. I just wanted to understand. Brandon's face had transformed instantly, rage replacing the mask of calm he usually wore. You were snooping? No, you told me to find the tax documents. You don't understand business, Sarah. Those numbers are above your pay grade now. You're confused. Pregnancy brain. But Sarah had graduated top of her class from MIT. She knew what she saw. Brandon, I think you should talk to your accountant about this because it looks like that was when he grabbed her wrist for the first time. Not hard enough to break anything. Just hard enough to hurt. Hard enough to scare her. Drop it, he'd said, his voice low and dangerous. You're emotional. You're not thinking clearly. And if you mention this to anyone, you'll regret it. Sarah had dropped it, told herself she was wrong, told herself Brandon knew better, told herself that questioning him again wasn't worth the risk. Now, lying in the trauma bay at St. Luke's Hospital with her arm in a temporary cast and monitors tracking her baby's heartbeat, Sarah understood the terrible truth. She hadn't been confused. She hadn't been emotional. She had been right. And Brandon had been terrified that she would expose him. The doctor finished examining her, his expression grave. You have a displaced fracture of your radius. We'll need an orthopedic consult, but I'm more concerned about the baby. You're showing signs of preterm labor. Your cervix is beginning to dilate. We need to keep you here for at least 72 hours, possibly longer. Terror gripped Sarah's chest. The baby! We're doing everything we can to stop the labor, but you need complete rest. No stress, no visitors unless you approve them. A nurse appeared in the doorway, a woman in her 60s with kind eyes and an air of having seen everything. Mrs. Mitchell, we've placed you under protective status. That means your husband cannot access your medical information or visit without your explicit permission. You're safe here. The word safe felt foreign in Sarah's mouth. She couldn't remember the last time she'd felt safe. Nurse Rita moved closer, checking the IV line with efficient hands. Honey, I've been working emergency room for 30 years. I've seen a lot of men in a lot of situations. And I can tell you this. Rich men in handcuffs cry louder than anyone else. Your husband? He ain't special. He ain't untouchable. He's just another man who hurt someone he was supposed to protect. Sarah felt tears sliding down her cheeks, not from pain this time, but from something else. Something that felt almost like hope. What if he comes back? What if he tries to take my son? That's not going to happen, said a familiar voice from the doorway. Margaret Hayes entered, carrying a leather briefcase and an expression of determination that made Sarah's heart skip. Behind her walked a woman in her mid-40s with sharp eyes and an even sharper suit. Sarah, this is Rebecca Morrison, Margaret said. She's the best divorce attorney in New York, and she's going to help you bury your husband. Sarah stared at them both, confusion mixing with the pain medication beginning to cloud her thoughts. I don't understand. How do you know me? Why are you helping me? Margaret pulled a chair close to the hospital bed, her expression softening. Because I knew your mother, Sarah. We met at a conference 20 years ago. She talked about you constantly, about how brilliant you were, how you were going to change the world. And I promised her that if life ever became cruel to you, I would step in. My mother died when I was in college, Sarah whispered. I know, and I'm sorry I didn't reach out sooner. But I'm here now, and I'm not letting Brandon Mitchell destroy what's left of your life. Rebecca opened her briefcase, pulling out documents with the efficiency of someone who had done this 1,000 times before. Sarah, I need you to listen carefully. A journalist named Jake Holloway was at the airport this morning. He filmed the entire assault, multiple angles, 4K video, clear audio. He's agreed to provide the footage for your case. Sarah's breath caught. Everything? Everything. Brandon grabbing you, Tiffany whispering in his ear, the moment your arm broke, your son screaming, all of it. This is enough for an emergency protective order and criminal charges. But Brandon has money, he has lawyers, he'll lose, Margaret interrupted firmly. Because this time, he wasn't careful. This time, he attacked you in front of 200 witnesses. This time, the world saw exactly who he is. Nurse Rita brought Sarah a cup of water, squeezing her shoulder gently. You don't have to decide everything right now, honey, but you should know you're not alone anymore. These ladies, they're the real deal. Sarah looked down at her broken arm, then at her pregnant belly, then at Liam sleeping in a small crib beside her bed. Her son's face was peaceful now, unaware of the nightmare his mother was navigating, unaware that the man who was supposed to protect them both had become the greatest threat to their survival. For the first time in 3 years, Sarah made a decision that was entirely her own. What do I need to sign? The week after the airport incident passed in a blur of legal paperwork and medical monitoring. Sarah remained in the hospital. Her arm properly set and casted, the contractions finally stopped by medication and bed rest. Liam stayed with her, playing with toys that nurses brought him, sleeping in the crib beside her bed, blissfully unaware that his entire life was being restructured around him. Rebecca Morrison visited daily, bringing documents that would reshape Sarah's future. Emergency protective order, divorce filing, emergency custody petition. Each signature felt like taking back a piece of herself that Brandon had stolen. Jake Holloway came too, bringing his laptop and USB drives. Sarah watched the footage for the first time with her hand pressed over her mouth, seeing herself from the outside, seeing how small she looked, how vulnerable, how obviously pregnant and terrified, seeing Brandon's face twisted with rage, hearing Tiffany's whispered poison, hearing the crack of her own arm breaking. I've isolated the audio, Jake explained, adjusting his glasses. His voice was gentle, professional, the voice of someone who understood trauma. You can hear Tiffany clearly saying, she found the accounts, she'll destroy you. And Brandon responding, then I'll destroy her first. That's premeditation, Sarah. That's evidence of intent. Will it be enough? Sarah asked. It's more than enough for the protective order, Rebecca answered, and it gives the DA ammunition for assault charges. Brandon posted $5 million bail yesterday, but he's not allowed within 500 feet of you or Liam. If he violates that order even once, he goes directly to jail. Sarah exhaled slowly. So I'm safe. You're safer, Margaret corrected from her position by the window. But men like Brandon don't accept defeat easily. He'll fight back. We need to be prepared. Detective Marcus Cole arrived that afternoon to take Sarah's formal statement. He was a tall black man in his 50s with kind eyes that had seen too much suffering. When he sat down beside Sarah's bed, his first words surprised her. Mrs. Mitchell, I want you to know something. 20 years ago, I failed to protect my sister from her husband. By the time I understood how bad things were, it was too late. She didn't survive. So when I say I'm going to do everything in my power to make sure Brandon Mitchell faces consequences, I mean it. This isn't just a case file to me. Sarah felt tears prick her eyes. I'm sorry about your sister. Don't be sorry. Just let me help you. Let me do for you what I couldn't do for her. The statement took 2 hours. Sarah recounted everything. The isolation, the financial control, the gaslighting. The night she found the offshore accounts, the escalating intimidation. By the end, Detective Cole's jaw was tight with suppressed anger. This pattern is textbook coercive control, he said, combined with the assault footage And the financial evidence you provided, we have a strong case. The DA is taking this seriously. That evening, Sarah allowed herself to feel something she hadn't felt in years. Hope. Fragile, tentative hope. She held Liam while he slept, rubbing her belly where his little sister grew, and whispered promises. We're going to be okay. Mama's going to make sure we're okay. For the first time in 3 years, Sarah actually believed it might be true. But she had no idea the real nightmare was just beginning. 2 weeks after the airport incident, Sarah was discharged from the hospital with strict instructions for bed rest. Margaret had offered her guest house in Connecticut, a secure property with cameras and 24/7 security. It seemed like the perfect solution. Distance from Brandon, safety for Liam, space to heal and plan. But on the morning they were supposed to leave for Connecticut, Rebecca called with news that made Sarah's blood run cold. Brandon held a press conference an hour ago. His lawyer is Daniel Cross. Sarah's stomach dropped. Even she knew that name. Daniel Cross was the attorney celebrities hired when they were caught red-handed. The man who could spin anything, make victims look like villains, turn public opinion on a dime. What did he say? Sarah asked, though part of her didn't want to know. Rebecca's sigh told her everything before the words did. He's claiming you're unstable, that you have untreated postpartum depression, that you've been making false accusations against Brandon for months, and he released evidence. What evidence? I didn't do anything. I know, but he has texts that appear to show you threatening Brandon, a psychiatric evaluation from a doctor claiming you refused treatment, and video of you yelling at Brandon, though conveniently, the video doesn't show what happened before you yelled. Sarah's mind raced back. The texts. Brandon had her phone constantly. He could have sent messages from her account. The psychiatric evaluation. He'd insisted she see his family doctor after Liam was born, claimed she needed help, but she'd refused medication because she was breastfeeding. The video, yes, she'd yelled at Brandon after he destroyed her laptop with her thesis backup still on it. But the footage didn't show that part. He's flipping the narrative, Sarah whispered, making me look crazy. That's exactly what he's doing. And Sarah, I need you to prepare yourself. Social media is brutal right now. Half the internet thinks you're a gold digger trying to destroy a good man. The hashtag #StandWithBrandon is trending. Sarah felt like she'd been punched in the stomach. She pulled up her phone with shaking hands, ignoring Rebecca's protests, and opened Twitter. The hatred hit her like a physical blow. Pregnant women are so emotional. She probably fell herself and blamed him. Classic gold digger move. Fake abuse, get the money. I've seen Brandon Mitchell speak. He's a gentleman. She's clearly lying. Comment after comment after comment, thousands of people who'd never met her, never met Brandon, deciding they knew the truth based on 30 seconds of carefully edited footage. Sarah's hands trembled as she scrolled, tears blurring her vision. A gentle hand took the phone away. Nurse Rita, who'd come to help with Sarah's discharge, looked at her sternly. What did I tell you about social media? Those people argue about whether water is wet. Don't give them real estate in your brain, honey. But it was too late. The damage was done. Sarah felt the hope she'd built over the past 2 weeks crumbling like sand through her fingers. Margaret appeared in the doorway, her expression grim. We need to leave for Connecticut. Now, there are reporters outside the hospital. What? How did they find me? Brandon told them, this is part of his strategy. Control the narrative. Make you look like you're hiding. Make himself look like the victim. Sarah allowed them to guide her to a service elevator, Liam in her arms, her broken arm throbbing with every step. As they exited through the hospital's delivery entrance, she caught a glimpse of the front entrance on a security monitor. Dozens of reporters, cameras, microphones. Her life had become a spectacle. Her pain entertainment for strangers. Her nightmare viral content. In the car driving to Connecticut, Sarah stared out the window at the gray December landscape and felt something inside her breaking that had nothing to do with Bones. This was worse than the physical assault. This was her reputation, her truth, her very sanity being called into question by millions of people who would never know her name beyond this scandal. How do I fight this? She whispered. Margaret reached back from the front seat, squeezing Sarah's uninjured hand. By surviving, by refusing to break, by trusting that truth eventually wins, even when lies run faster. But as they drove north toward Connecticut, Sarah wasn't sure she believed that anymore, and she had no idea things were about to get so much worse. The Connecticut estate was beautiful in a way that made Sarah's isolation even more painful. 20 acres of snow-covered grounds, a main house that looked like something from a magazine, and a guest house where Margaret insisted Sarah and Liam stay. Cameras monitored every entrance. Security guards patrolled the perimeter. On paper, it was the safest place Sarah could be. But safety turned out to be an illusion. Sarah had been there for 3 days when the first catastrophe struck. She was feeding Liam breakfast, her belly tight with the baby's movements, when Rebecca called with news that made the room spin. Sarah, the offshore accounts Brandon was hiding. They're gone, completely wiped clean. Moved yesterday to accounts we can't trace. Sarah set down the spoon she'd been holding, her hand shaking. What does that mean? It means we have no financial evidence. Brandon's lawyers will claim poverty in the divorce. He'll say he barely has enough to support himself, let alone pay child support. And without those account records, we can't prove otherwise. But I saw them. I have the file names, the dates. I believe you, but the actual accounts, gone. And digital forensics found evidence the files on his laptop were deleted and overwritten multiple times. We might never recover them. Sarah felt her throat closing. So he gets away with the fraud too? I'm sorry, Sarah. We're still pursuing other angles, but this is a major setback. Sarah was still processing that news when her phone rang again 30 seconds later. Detective Cole this time. Mrs. Mitchell, I need to tell you something before you hear it elsewhere. The DA is reducing Brandon's charges from felony assault to misdemeanor. His lawyers submitted expert testimony claiming your x-rays show only a hairline fracture, not a displaced fracture. They're arguing the hospital's initial diagnosis was wrong. Sarah looked down at her casted arm, feeling the deep ache that still kept her awake at night. My arm was broken. I heard it snap. I felt it break. I know. I believe you. But x-rays can be interpreted different ways. And Brandon's lawyers found 3 orthopedic surgeons willing to say the break isn't as severe as claimed. The DA doesn't think a jury will convict on felony charges, so he's offering a plea deal for misdemeanor assault. What does that mean for Brandon? Probably probation, anger management classes, a fine, but no jail time, Sarah. I'm sorry. The phone slipped from Sarah's fingers. No jail time. After everything, after attacking her in front of their son, after breaking her arm while she was 7 months pregnant, Brandon would walk away with probation. Sarah barely had time to process that before Margaret burst through the door, her face pale with an emotion Sarah had never seen there before. Fear. Sarah, I just got a call from my assistant at the office. Brandon filed an emergency custody petition this morning. He's claiming you abandoned Liam at the airport, that you're mentally unstable, that you're a danger to the children. What? That's insane. I didn't abandon anyone. He attacked me. I know, but he has his brother Ryan willing to testify that you've been erratic. His lawyer is asking for immediate supervised visitation while they investigate your fitness as a mother. Sarah couldn't breathe. The room was spinning, walls closing in, one blow after another, each worse than the last. No financial evidence, reduced charges, emergency custody hearing. She felt her chest tightening, breath coming in short, panicked gasps. The baby inside her kicked hard, as if sensing her distress. Margaret knelt beside her, hands on her shoulders. Sarah breathed, slow breaths, in and out. Stay with me. But Sarah couldn't slow down. 3 years of trauma, 2 weeks of hope, and now this, the complete collapse of everything she'd believed would save her. The system she'd trusted to protect her was failing at every turn. Brandon had money, lawyers, influence. She had nothing but her word and footage that half the country didn't believe. I can't do this, Sarah gasped. I can't fight him. He's too powerful. He's going to win. He's going to take my children. No, Margaret said firmly. He's not. Because you're stronger than you know, and we're not done fighting. But as Sarah collapsed against Margaret, sobbing with broken hope and crushing fear, she felt like fighting was pointless. Like maybe Brandon was right. Maybe she should just give up. Maybe surrender was the only way to survive. Liam toddled over, wrapping his small arms around her leg. Mom, okay? He asked in his tiny voice. Sarah looked down at her son's innocent face, at his worried eyes, and felt something shift inside her. She was allowed to break, but she wasn't allowed to quit. Not with 2 children depending on her. Not when Liam was watching to see if his mother would stand or fall. She took a shaky breath, wiping her eyes with her uninjured hand. Mama's going to be okay, baby, she whispered, though she wasn't sure she believed it yet. Mama's going to fight. 4 weeks after the airport assault, Sarah walked into family court feeling like she was walking toward her own execution. She was 8 months pregnant now, her belly enormous, moving slowly with Rebecca at her side. Every step hurt. Her arm was healing but still weak. Her spirit was barely holding together. Brandon sat across the courtroom looking perfect. Clean-shaven, expensive suit, calm expression. The picture of a concerned father. Next to him, his lawyer Daniel Cross arranged papers with efficient precision, and in the row behind Brandon sat his brother Ryan, ready to testify. The judge entered, and Sarah's fate was placed in the hands of a woman she'd never met. Brandon took the stand first. His testimony was a masterclass in manipulation. Your Honor, I love my wife deeply, but she's been struggling since our son was born. Postpartum depression that went untreated. I tried to help. I offered to pay for the best therapist, the best medication. She refused everything. That's not true, Sarah whispered to Rebecca, who squeezed her hand in warning. They'd discuss this. Let him talk. They'd get their turn. The morning at the airport, I was trying to calm her down. She was having an episode. I reached for her arm to steady her, and she fell. I would never intentionally hurt Sarah. Never hurt the mother of my children. Sarah watched the judge's face, searching for any sign she didn't believe him. But the woman's expression remained neutral, unreadable. I'm asking for joint custody because I'm worried about my children's safety. I want them protected. I want Sarah to get the help she needs. That's all I've ever wanted. When Rebecca cross-examined him, she was ruthless. Mr. Mitchell, if you were so concerned about your wife's mental health, why didn't you mention it to any of her doctors during her pregnancy? I didn't want to embarrass her. But you're willing to mention it now in open court, in front of reporters? Rebecca gestured to the gallery where journalists scribbled notes. I'm worried about my children. Are you? Because according to hospital records, you haven't called once to check on your son since the incident. Not once in 4 weeks. Brandon's composure slipped for just a second. I was advised by my lawyer not to make contact because of the protective order. The protective order prevents you from contacting Sarah. It doesn't prevent you from calling the hospital to check on your son's welfare. Yet you didn't. Why? I thought it might upset Sarah. Or perhaps you weren't actually concerned at all. Then came Ryan's testimony. Brandon's brother took the stand with practiced reluctance, playing the role of someone who didn't want to be there but felt obligated to tell the truth. I've seen Sarah act erratically, Ryan said, his voice heavy with false sympathy. At Thanksgiving 2 years ago, she threw a plate across the room during an argument. Brandon had to calm her down. Sarah felt her heart stop. She leaned toward Rebecca, whispering urgently, That never happened. I've never thrown anything. He's lying. Rebecca nodded but kept her expression neutral. When it was her turn to question Ryan, she started gently. Mr. Mitchell, you said this incident occurred at Thanksgiving 2 years ago? Yes. Where was this Thanksgiving dinner held? At Brandon's penthouse. And who else was present? Ryan hesitated just for a fraction of a second. Just family. Brandon, Sarah, me, and my wife. No one else? No catering staff? No building security? No other guests? No, just us. Rebecca pulled out a document. Your Honor, I'd like to submit Exhibit F. These are security logs from Brandon Mitchell's apartment building showing that on Thanksgiving Day 2 years ago, the Mitchells hosted a catered dinner for 20 guests. The building has no record of Ryan Mitchell or his wife being present. The courtroom went still. Ryan's face drained of color. Mr. Mitchell, did you just commit perjury? I must have been confused about the date. Or you're lying to help your brother. Mr. Mitchell, how much is Brandon paying you monthly? Objection! Daniel Cross was on his feet. Your Honor, I have bank records showing $50,000 deposited into Ryan Mitchell's account monthly from a company owned by Brandon Mitchell. This isn't confused testimony. This is paid testimony. The judge's expression finally changed, hardening as she looked at Ryan, then at Brandon. But before she could speak, Sarah gasped. A rush of warm liquid soaked through her dress. Her water had broken. The courtroom erupted into chaos. Rebecca jumped up, calling for an ambulance. Margaret rushed forward from the gallery. The judge ordered a recess. And through it all, Sarah saw Brandon stand, saw him try to approach, saw his face twisted with something that might have been concern or might have been fear of how this looked. Detective Cole appeared from the back of the courtroom, stepping between Brandon and Sarah with quiet authority. Mr. Mitchell, stay where you are. She's my wife. I need to. Your wife has an active protective order against you. Step back, now. As paramedics rushed in with a stretcher, as nurses surrounded Sarah, as the courtroom dissolved into controlled chaos, Sarah felt another contraction rip through her. Her baby was coming, here, now, in the middle of a custody battle with her abuser watching. But as they wheeled her past Brandon, Sarah did something she'd never done before. She looked him directly in the eye, and she didn't look away, didn't flinch, didn't break. Because somewhere between the airport and this moment, between the three catastrophes and this courtroom, Sarah had stopped being a victim waiting to be saved. She'd become a survivor learning to fight back. Sarah gave birth to her daughter Emma 3 hours later in the same hospital where this nightmare had begun. Margaret held her hand through every contraction, every push, every moment of pain that somehow felt cleaner than anything she'd experienced with Brandon. This pain had purpose. This pain brought life instead of breaking it. When the doctor placed Emma in her arms, tiny and perfect, and screaming with outrage at the world, Sarah felt something shift deep inside her chest. Not just love, though that was overwhelming, but determination, certainty, a bone-deep understanding that she would do whatever it took to protect these children. "You did it," Margaret said softly, tears in her eyes. "Both battles in one day." Rebecca entered an hour later with news. "The judge postponed the custody hearing until you've recovered. But Sarah, the footage of Ryan's perjury is already online. Public opinion is starting to shift. People are realizing Brandon isn't the victim he pretends to be." Sarah held Emma closer, feeling her daughter's tiny heartbeat against her chest. "What happens now?" "Now we prepare for the next round, because Brandon isn't going to stop." But Sarah had already decided something. She was done waiting for Brandon to make the next move. She was done being reactive, defensive, trapped in a corner. It was time to take control of her own story. The next morning, Jake Holloway visited with his laptop and an expression Sarah had learned to recognize. He'd found something. "Sarah, I've been investigating Tiffany Reed, following her digital trail, and I found something you need to see." He opened his laptop, pulling up emails that made Sarah's heart race. Messages between Tiffany and executives at a company called Apex Investments. Messages that dated back 2 years. Messages that revealed a conspiracy Sarah had never imagined. "Tiffany isn't just Brandon's assistant," Jake explained. "She's an operative. Apex hired her to infiltrate Mitchell Capital, destabilize Brandon emotionally, and create the conditions for a hostile one-all takeover." Sarah stared at the screen, reading email after email. Tiffany reporting on Brandon's state of mind. Tiffany describing how she'd earned his trust. Tiffany detailing her plan to make Brandon paranoid about his wife. "She set me up," Sarah whispered. "The video of me supposedly cheating. The whispers about me finding the accounts. She wanted Brandon to attack me. Not just attack you, she wanted him to attack you publicly, with witnesses. She wanted footage that would destroy him completely so Apex could buy Mitchell Capital at bankruptcy prices. You were collateral damage in a corporate war, Sarah." But here's the twist. Jake pulled up another set of documents. Tiffany also embezzled $40 million from Brandon's offshore accounts. She framed it to make it look like you discovered the theft. Brandon's paranoia, she deliberately created it. Sarah felt her mind reeling. "So none of this was really about me. I was just a pawn." "You were, but now you're the only person with leverage over both of them. Brandon doesn't know about Tiffany's betrayal yet. Apex doesn't know their operative went rogue. And you have all the evidence." Sarah looked down at Emma sleeping in her arms, then at Margaret standing in the doorway with an expression Sarah couldn't quite read. "Margaret, did you know about this?" Margaret stepped forward slowly. "Not all of it, but I knew Tiffany wasn't what she appeared to be. I'd been tracking irregularities at Mitchell Capital for months as a board member. I suspected corporate espionage, but I couldn't prove it." "Is that why you were at the airport that morning?" Margaret's silence was answer enough. "You knew he was going to attack me," Sarah said softly. "You knew, and you let it happen. I needed evidence that couldn't be disputed. I needed Brandon caught on camera in a way that couldn't be explained away. I'm sorry, Sarah, I used you as bait, and I'll carry that guilt for the rest of my life." Sarah felt tears burning behind her eyes. Everyone had used her, Tiffany for her corporate conspiracy, Brandon for his ego and control. Even Margaret, the woman who claimed to be protecting her, had used her pain for evidence. How do I know you won't use me again? Margaret met her eyes steadily. You don't, but I'm asking you to trust me one more time. Because the revenge I have planned, Brandon won't see it coming, and neither will Apex. Jake closed his laptop. For what it's worth, I actually just wanted the story. Does that make me better or worse? Despite everything, Sarah found herself laughing. A brittle, exhausted laugh that hurt her still healing body. Worse, definitely worse. But as she sat there holding her newborn daughter, surrounded by people who had their own agendas, Sarah realized something important. She didn't need them to be perfect. She didn't need them to be selfless heroes. She just needed them to be useful. And she was waiting for someone else to save her. It was time to save herself. 1 week after Emma's birth, Sarah sat in Margaret's Connecticut study with her daughter sleeping in a bassinet beside her. Rebecca and Jake sat across from her. Margaret stood by the window. And for the first time since this nightmare began, Sarah wasn't asking for help. She was giving orders. Here's what we're going to do, Sarah said, her voice steady despite the exhaustion pulling at her. Jake, you have evidence of Tiffany's conspiracy with Apex, evidence of the embezzlement, evidence that she manipulated Brandon into attacking me. We're going to use that. How? Jake asked. We're going to approach Apex directly. We're going to offer them a deal? Drop the takeover attempt, pay me $25 million in settlement, or I take everything to the FBI, corporate espionage, wire fraud, conspiracy, all of it. Rebecca leaned forward. That's aggressive, Sarah. You'd be negotiating with a corporation that has unlimited legal resources. But I have something they need, silence. They don't want the FBI investigating their operative. They don't want publicity about their failed takeover. $25 million is nothing compared to what they'd lose in bad press and legal fees. Margaret smiled slightly. And what do you do with that money? I outlawyer Brandon. I hire investigators. I find evidence he can't make disappear. And I let Brandon and Tiffany destroy each other. Sarah looked at each of them in turn. You all used me for your own purposes. Now I'm using this situation for mine. My children's future. My freedom. That's all that matters. Margaret studied her for a long moment. You remember what I said? That you graduated MIT, top of your class in systems optimization? I remember. This is just another system to optimize, and you're finally seeing it clearly. 2 days later, Sarah walked into Apex Investments headquarters in downtown Manhattan. She was still recovering from childbirth, moving slowly, but her mind was sharper than it had been in years. Rebecca walked beside her. Jake followed with a briefcase full of evidence. The Apex CEO, a man named Richard Sterling, met them in a conference room with windows overlooking the city. His expression was carefully neutral. Mrs. Mitchell, I'm curious why you requested this meeting. Sarah placed a USB drive on the conference table between them. Because I have proof that your company hired Tiffany Reed to infiltrate Mitchell Capital. Proof of the embezzlement, proof of the conspiracy, and I'm giving you a choice. Sterling's expression didn't change, but Sarah saw his jaw tighten almost imperceptibly. That's quite an accusation. It's not an accusation, it's a fact. And you have two options. Option 1, pay me $25 million, terminate Tiffany publicly, and drop the takeover. I'll keep this evidence to myself. Option 2, I go to the FBI today, and your company spends the next 5 years in litigation while your reputation burns. You're bluffing. Sarah opened the briefcase, pulling out printed emails, financial records, and photographs. She spread them across the table methodically. Am I? Sterling looked at the evidence, his face carefully blank. But Sarah had spent years learning to read men who hid their emotions. She saw the calculation behind his eyes. The moment he realized she wasn't bluffing at all. $15 million, he said. Sarah leaned forward, placing both hands flat on the table. Her voice was calm, cold, and absolutely certain. I spent 3 years optimizing my husband's life, managing his schedule, covering his mistakes, making him look good while he made me invisible. This meeting? This is me optimizing my freedom. And Mr. Sterling, you're going to pay exactly what it's worth. $25 million. not a dollar less. The room went silent. Rebecca's eyes widened slightly. Jake stopped breathing. Even Sterling looked momentarily stunned by the steel in her voice. Sarah continued, her gaze never leaving Sterling's face. I can break down supply chains for Fortune 500 companies. I can find inefficiencies in systems that billion-dollar corporations miss. And right now, I'm looking at your company's biggest inefficiency. Tiffany Reed, you're going to pay me to eliminate that problem before I eliminate your entire operation. Do we understand each other? Sterling stared at her for what felt like an eternity. Then he picked up his phone. Get legal in here and draft a termination letter for Tiffany Reed. 30 minutes later, Sarah had a contract. 30 minutes after that, she had a certified check for $25 million. And as she walked out of Apex headquarters, she pulled out her phone and called Brandon. He answered on the first ring. Sarah, are you... Turn on CNBC, she interrupted. What? Turn on CNBC right now. She heard rustling, then silence. Then Brandon's voice, tight with rage and confusion. What did you do? On the screen, breaking news scrolled across the bottom. Mitchell Capital executive Tiffany Reed terminated for embezzlement. Apex Investments issues statement. I stopped being your victim, Sarah said calmly. I stopped being anyone's victim. See you in court, Brandon. She hung up before he could respond. Rebecca looked at her with something like awe. You just took down a corporate conspiracy while 9 days postpartum. Who are you? Sarah smiled for the first time in weeks. I'm the woman who's finally done letting other people write my story. The custody hearing resumed 3 weeks after Emma's birth. Sarah walked into the courtroom feeling different than she had the last time. Stronger, clearer, ready. Brandon looked haggard. Tiffany's betrayal had broken something in him that money couldn't fix. His perfect facade had cracks now, visible to anyone paying attention. He sat alone at his table, Ryan conspicuously absent. The judge entered, her expression severe. Before we continue, I've reviewed the evidence submitted by Mrs. Mitchell's counsel. Mr. Mitchell, I have some questions for you. What followed was a systematic dismantling of everything Brandon had built. Rebecca presented evidence methodically, piece by piece, building a case so airtight that even Daniel Cross couldn't spin it. Jake's airport footage from 7 angles. Hospital records showing the severity of Sarah's injuries and the risk to her pregnancy. Financial forensics proving Brandon had hidden money and committed fraud. Security footage from the restaurant contradicting Ryan's testimony. Bank records showing Ryan was on Brandon's payroll. And then the final blow. Evidence that Brandon had known about Tiffany's embezzlement for months and had helped cover it up, making him an accessory to corporate fraud. Your Honor, this isn't a case of a confused wife making false accusations, Rebecca concluded. This is a case of a powerful man who systematically abused, controlled, and assaulted his wife, who committed perjury, who suborned perjury from a family member, who covered up embezzlement. Mr. Mitchell isn't a victim. He's a criminal. The judge's expression was granite. Mr. Mitchell, you assaulted your pregnant wife in front of your son, broke her arm, and endangered your unborn child. You've been exposed committing perjury in this court, and you've been named in an FBI investigation for covering up embezzlement. I'm granting Mrs. Mitchell full physical and legal custody of both children. You will have supervised visitation 1 day per month when and if you are released from custody. Your Honor, The judge held up her hand. I'm not finished. Bailiff, Detective Cole, please approach. Detective Cole stepped forward from the back of the courtroom, badge visible. Mr. Mitchell, you're under arrest for aggravated assault, perjury, witness tampering, and accessory to embezzlement. You have the right to remain silent. Sarah watched as handcuffs snapped onto Brandon's wrists, watched as he tried to maintain his composure and failed, watched as he looked at her with something that might have been an appeal for help. But then Brandon spoke, his voice breaking, desperate in a way Sarah had never heard. Sarah, please, you have to listen. I need to tell you something. There's something you don't know about. Mr. Mitchell, you have the right to remain silent, Detective Cole repeated firmly. But Brandon pushed forward, his words tumbling out in a rush of panic and confession. I was going to tell you. I swear I was going to tell you before the baby came. Sarah, I have... Stop talking, Daniel Cross hissed. grabbing Brandon's arm. But Brandon shook him off, his eyes wild, fixed on Sarah. I have another family in California, a wife, 2 daughters, 8 and 6 years old. The courtroom went absolutely silent. Sarah felt the world tilt sideways. Rebecca's hand on her arm was the only thing keeping her upright. Margaret's face had gone white. Even the judge looked momentarily stunned. What? Sarah whispered, though the word barely came out. Brandon was crying now, real tears streaming down his face. Her name is Jennifer. We got married 11 years ago. Before I met you, I never divorced her. Sarah, our marriage isn't legal. It never was. I'm so sorry. I was going to fix it. I was going to... Mr. Mitchell, stop talking immediately, Daniel Cross practically shouted. Detective Cole pulled Brandon toward the door. We're leaving, now. But the damage was done. The entire courtroom had heard it. Sarah felt her knees buckle, and Margaret caught her, guiding her into a chair. He was married, Sarah said, her voice hollow. The whole time. Our marriage was fake. Liam and Emma are your children? Rebecca said firmly, kneeling beside her. Legitimate in every legal sense. This actually helps us, Sarah. Bigamy is another felony, and it means you were never legally married, which means the divorce is unnecessary. You're free. You've been free this whole time. Sarah looked at Emma in Margaret's arms, at Liam playing quietly in the corner with a bailiff watching over him. Her children, her babies, born from a marriage that never existed to a man who was living a double life. Does Jennifer know? Sarah asked quietly. About me? About us? Detective Cole paused at the door. We'll be contacting her as part of the investigation. I'm sorry, Mrs. Mitchell. Or I suppose, just Sarah, she said, her voice steadying. Just call me Sarah. As they led Brandon away, still crying, still trying to explain, Sarah felt something unexpected wash over her. Not devastation, though that would come later. Not rage, though that was there too. Relief. Because Brandon hadn't just been hiding money and covering up fraud. He'd been hiding an entire life. 2 lives. 2 families. 2 sets of children who would now know their father was a liar and a criminal. And Sarah? Sarah was free of him in a way she'd never imagined possible. Not just legally free, but completely, utterly untethered from the man who had tried to destroy her. Later, after the courtroom cleared, after the reporters got their footage, after Rebecca confirmed that the bigamy charge meant Brandon was looking at 5 to 7 years in prison instead of 2 to 3, Sarah sat in a quiet hallway holding Emma while Liam played with blocks beside her. Jake approached carefully. How do you feel? Sarah considered the question for a long time. Like I survived something I didn't even know I was fighting. He wasn't just abusing me. He was living a whole other life. Jennifer and those little girls, they're victims too. What will you do? I'll reach out to her when the time is right, when she's ready, because she deserves to know she's not alone, that someone understands what he put her through. Sarah paused, looking at her sleeping daughter. And then I'm going to build the life I should have had all along. For me, for my children, free of him, finally, completely free. 6 months later, Sarah stood in her new apartment kitchen making breakfast while Liam and Emma played nearby. The apartment was modest by Manhattan standards, but it was hers, bought with her own money, furnished with things she chose, a home built on freedom instead of fear. Her consulting business was growing steadily. Logistics companies were realizing that the woman who'd taken down a billionaire in a corporate conspiracy was exactly who they wanted optimizing their supply chains. She worked from home mostly, her own hours, her own terms. Rebecca stopped by that morning with updates. Brandon's parole hearing was denied. The bigamy charge added years to his sentence. He'll serve at least 6 years now. And Tiffany was sentenced to 5 years for embezzlement and conspiracy. Sarah poured coffee, feeling something she hadn't expected. Not satisfaction, not anger, but a sense of closure finally settling into place like the last piece of a puzzle she'd been trying to solve for years. I heard from Jennifer last week, Sarah said quietly, Brandon's other wife. She's filing for divorce too. She said she'd had no idea about me, about us. She thought he traveled for business. How did that conversation go? Hard, sad, but necessary. We're going to meet next month. She wants her daughters to know Liam and Emma someday. They're sisters, after all. Half-sisters. Rebecca sat down across from her. How do you feel about all of it? I feel like I did my job. I survived. I protected my children. That's enough. They sat together, two women who'd become friends through trauma and triumph, watching the children play. Sarah's phone buzzed with a text from Margaret. Thinking of you today. Proud of how far you've come. Sarah smiled. She'd forgiven Margaret eventually, understanding that sometimes protection came in messy forms. Sometimes people made mistakes trying to do the right thing. That didn't excuse the manipulation, but it made it human. A knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. Sarah answered it to find Jake standing there with coffee and a nervous expression. I know you said no interviews, he began, but I wondered if maybe you'd want to just talk, as friends. No recording, no story, just conversation. Sarah studied him. Over the past months, Jake had proven himself trustworthy. He'd kept his word, protected her privacy when he could have profited from sensationalism. He'd been kind to Liam, thoughtful about boundaries, respectful of her healing. Friends who respect boundaries, she asked? The best kind? Sarah invited him in, slowly, carefully. She was learning to trust again, but trust earned gradually instead of given blindly. They sat at her kitchen table, talking about nothing important, while Liam showed Jake his new blocks and Emma napped peacefully in her bouncer. It felt normal, beautifully, perfectly normal. Later, after Jake left, after the children were in bed, Sarah sat at her small desk working on a logistics proposal. Her laptop glowed in the dim light. Numbers and supply chains filled the screen, patterns she could see clearly now, without Brandon's shadow clouding everything. The doorbell rang, startling her. A courier stood there holding a large manila envelope. Package for Sarah Mitchell. Well, technically Sarah Carter now, right? Sign here. Sarah signed, confused. The return address was from a federal prison in upstate New York. Inside was a letter, handwritten, 7 pages long, from Brandon. Sarah sat down at her kitchen table, the letter in front of her. She could see Brandon's handwriting through the envelope, that familiar slant she'd seen on birthday cards and grocery lists and love notes from another lifetime. She opened the envelope carefully. The first line read, Dear Sarah, I've had time to think about what I did to you, to us, to our children. I need you to understand why Sarah stopped reading. She sat there for a long moment, the letter in her hands, feeling the weight of 7 pages of explanations she'd once desperately wanted, apologies she'd once needed to hear, reasons that might have mattered 3 years ago, 2 years ago, even 6 months ago. But not anymore. Sarah stood up, walked into the kitchen, and opened the drawer where she kept her trash bags. She looked at the letter one more time. 7 pages, hundreds of words, all the explanations Brandon thought she needed. Then she folded the letter, didn't read another word, and dropped it into the trash. No hesitation, no second thoughts, no tears. She tied the bag closed, set it by the door for morning pickup, and returned to her laptop. Her fingers moved across the keyboard, finishing the proposal she'd been working on. Numbers flowed, patterns emerged. Solutions presented themselves with the clarity that came from a mind no longer clouded by fear or doubt or the desperate need for closure from the wrong source. An hour later, Liam stirred in his room. Sarah went to him, scooping up her sleepy son. Mama? He murmured as she carried him back to his bed. Are we safe? Sarah looked at her son, really looked at him. At his father's eyes in his innocent face. At the life she was building for him and Emma, brick by brick, choice by choice. Yes, baby, she whispered, tucking him in, kissing his forehead. We're safe, we're free, and we're going to be more than okay. She stood in the doorway of his room for a moment, watching him fall back asleep. Then she walked to her own bedroom, where Emma slept in her crib, tiny fists curled, breathing softly. Sarah touched the window glass, looking out at the Brooklyn street below. November air seeped through, carrying the promise of winter. But she wasn't afraid of winter anymore. She'd survived worse than cold. She'd survived the version of herself who stayed silent, who accepted pain, who believed she deserved less than everything. That woman was gone now, transformed into someone who knew her worth and refused to settle for anything less. Final powerful voiceover, the wisdom moment. Sarah spoke softly to herself, to the night, to anyone who might need to hear it. Let go. People keep asking me if I read Brandon's letters, all 7 of them. They want to know if I found closure in his words. But here's what I learned. Closure doesn't come from the person who broke you. It comes from the life you build without them in it. He spent years trying to make me believe I couldn't survive without him. Now he sits in a cell writing letters I'll never read, while I build systems, raise children, and live a life he can't touch. That's not closure, that's freedom. And freedom doesn't need his permission. She turned away from the window and walked to her desk. Tomorrow morning, she'd take Liam to preschool and Emma to her pediatrician. She'd work on contracts and negotiate her rates. She'd have coffee with Rebecca and laugh about something mundane. She'd live an ordinary life made extraordinary by the simple fact that it was entirely her own. Brandon would sit in prison with Jennifer's divorce papers and Sarah's silence, both women moving forward without him. Tiffany would serve her sentence, her corporate ladder dreams turning to ash. Margaret would continue running her company, carrying the weight of her choices but knowing she'd help someone escape. And Sarah? Sarah would wake up every morning in a home that was hers, with children who would never see their mother accept abuse, and she would build a life from the ashes of the one that nearly killed her. The inheritance that mattered wasn't money or status or perfect endings. It was the quiet, powerful knowledge that she had taken back her life from people who tried to steal it. And she would never, ever let anyone take it again. So that's Sarah's story. From a broken arm at an airport to complete freedom 6 months later. From victim to survivor to someone who rebuilt her entire life on her own terms. If this story moved you, if it reminded you that healing is possible, that justice sometimes actually happens, then do me a favor. Hit that like button. It tells me these stories matter to you. Leave a comment, even just one word, about what part hit you hardest. Was it the airport scene, the courtroom moment when Brandon's other family was revealed, or that quiet ending where Sarah threw away his letter without reading it? Share this with someone who needs to hear it, someone fighting their own battle, someone who needs to remember they're stronger than they know. Your share might be the thing that saves someone's life. And subscribe to this channel because every week we bring you stories like Sarah's. True stories, powerful stories, stories about real people who faced impossible odds and found a way through. We're building a community here of people who believe survivors, who understand that strength isn't about never breaking. It's about choosing to stand back up. Next week, we have another story that'll shake you. A woman who discovered her husband's secret family the same day she found out she was pregnant with twins. What she did next, you won't believe it. But for now, remember what Sarah taught us. Closure doesn't come from your abuser. It comes from the life you build without them in it. Forgiveness is optional. Freedom is not. If you or someone you know is experiencing domestic violence, the National Domestic Violence Hotline is 1-800-799-7233. You deserve freedom. Take care of yourself. You're stronger than you know. And I'll see you in the next story.